Have you ever wondered how a small, defeated group of people could spark a movement that would literally change the world? I mean, right after the crucifixion of Jesus, his disciples were absolutely shattered. But then, just a few weeks later, they go from hiding in fear to boldly proclaiming a message that reshapes history. So, what happened? Well, the secret wasn't some brand new revelation. It was about learning to read their most ancient scriptures in a radical new way. Okay, let's dive into this incredible story of how their eyes were opened.
Everything really hinges on this one mysterious line from the Gospel of Luke. In English, it's, "Their eyes were kept from recognizing him." It's talking about two disciples on a lonely road to a village called Emmaus. A stranger joins them on their walk, but for some reason, they just can't see who it is. Why? What was blinding them? And, more importantly, what finally allowed them to see? That's the real mystery we're going to unravel today, using some fantastic insights from the biblical commentary of Marie-Noël Thabot.
All right, so to really understand the revelation, we first have to feel the despair. Let's just put ourselves in Jerusalem right after the crucifixion. For Jesus' followers, this wasn't just a sad day. It was the complete and utter end of everything they had ever hoped for. I mean, just look at the case of Peter. It's incredible. This is the same man who, absolutely crippled by fear, publicly denied he even knew Jesus. Not once, but 3 times. Yet, just 50 days later, he's standing up in front of a massive crowd in Jerusalem, delivering this powerful, off-the-cuff speech. So what on earth could possibly explain that kind of total 180? That's the puzzle we need to solve.
And the picture we get of the disciples is just bleak. They were literally hiding, holed up in a locked room, completely terrified. The 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, they weren't just taking a stroll, they were getting out of town, leaving Jerusalem, the center of all their dreams, behind them with faces just full of sadness. Their hope that Jesus was the one who would finally liberate Israel, well, that dream had been nailed to a cross and buried. It was over.
So here's the crucial point. How did they get from that rock bottom to this unshakable conviction? Well, the answer didn't come from some brand new story. It actually came from rereading the oldest story they had, their scriptures, but with totally new eyes. When Peter finally stands up to speak at Pentecost, he doesn't just say, "Hey everyone, guess what? Jesus is alive." No, he does something much more powerful. He makes a theological argument. He connects this shocking, unbelievable event directly to ancient prophecies. He's telling his fellow Jews, look, this wasn't some horrible mistake. This wasn't a tragedy. This was the plan all along, and the proof has been right here, in our sacred texts, this whole time.
And check out his logic. It's brilliant. Peter takes Psalm 16, a text his audience would have known by heart. He says, okay, David wrote, "You will not abandon me to the grave." But then Peter points out, hey, wait a minute. David did die. We all know that. His tomb is right here in Jerusalem. So David couldn't have been talking about himself. He must have been speaking as a prophet about someone yet to come, his descendant, the Messiah. And therefore, when Jesus was resurrected, well, that was the ultimate fulfillment of this ancient promise.
In this single verse right here, "You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead. You will not let your faithful one see decay." This became the absolute cornerstone of their new understanding. It completely reframed the crucifixion. It wasn't a failure anymore. It was a necessary passage. The Messiah, according to their own scriptures, had to pass through death to prove he could overcome it. The tragedy was actually a triumph that had been foretold all along. So now let's see how this new understanding, which was forged in a very Jewish context, was then shared with the wider world. The language had to shift a bit, but the core message, that stayed exactly the same.
When Peter writes his letter, he's talking to a different kind of audience. A lot of them were former pagans who were really drawn to Judaism. They were called God-fearers. Think of them as superfans. They went to the synagogue, they loved the scriptures, they followed a lot of the customs, but they hadn't taken that final step of circumcision. They were the perfect bridge audience, right? They were familiar with the ideas, but needed a new way to connect with them.
And Peter uses this phrase that can really throw us off today. He talks about the fear of God. But as Marie-Noël Thabot explains, this has absolutely nothing to do with being scared or terrified. In the biblical sense, it's the complete opposite. It's about that deep respect, that tenderness, and that absolute trust a small child has for a loving parent. So when Peter says to live in the fear of God, he's really saying, live your lives like beloved children who trust their parent completely.
He also talks about being redeemed by the blood of Christ, which, let's be honest, can sound pretty grim and transactional. But again, we have to look deeper. Peter himself says we were not redeemed by corruptible things like silver or gold. It's not a payment.
The blood of the lamb is this incredibly powerful symbol that points right back to the Passover, the original story of liberation from slavery in Egypt. It's about freedom, a new beginning, a gracious gift, not a debt being paid off.
And the story of the journey to Emmaus, it just perfectly captures this entire process we've been talking about. The despair, searching the scriptures, and that final eye-opening revelation. The whole thing is right there in this one incredible story from Luke's gospel.
So picture the scene. Two of Jesus' followers are walking away from Jerusalem, the very place their hopes were just crushed. They're dejected, they're confused, just trying to make sense of it all. And then this stranger joins them on the road. And he seems to be the only person in the entire country who has no idea what just went down.
This slide maps out their journey perfectly. It shows the exact steps from total blindness to sight. It starts with despair, walking away. Then the unrecognized Jesus joins them and does exactly what Peter would do later at Pentecost. He opens the scriptures for them. He walks them through everything, from Moses and all the prophets, explaining how it all pointed to this very moment. So the big revelation begins not with a miracle, but with a Bible study on the road. And then finally, when they share a meal, in that simple, everyday act of breaking bread, bam, their eyes are opened. They see. And what do? They immediately turn around and race all the way back to where they started.
And this is the moment of transformation. They ask each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They realized that even before their eyes could see him, something was already happening inside them. Understanding the scriptures in this new way wasn't just some intellectual puzzle. It was an experience that set their hearts on fire. This was the spark that would reignite everything.
And that burning in their hearts, well, it leads us to the final and maybe the most difficult question that the disciples and all of us really have to face. The stranger on the road asked them, was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things to enter into his glory? And that word necessary, that's a tough one. Necessary for whom? And why?
Thabit's commentary gives us two ways to look at this. The first is a transactional view, that suffering was some kind of price Jesus had to pay to earn his glory, as if God demanded a payment. But she argues that this just doesn't fit with the biblical picture of God as a giver of pure gifts. The second interpretation is that it was necessary not for God, but for us. It was necessary for humanity to finally see, in the most dramatic way possible, the true nature of God's love.
So, to put it simply, the suffering wasn't some kind of divine requirement, it was a human necessity. For us to even begin to grasp a love that's so far beyond our own, a love that doesn't back down in the face of hatred, betrayal, and even death, it had to be demonstrated. Just like Jesus himself said, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. The suffering was the ultimate revelation of that love in action. And this is really where it all lands. The disciples' journey from despair to hope wasn't just about realizing that Jesus was alive. It was about finally understanding why everything happened the way it did. As the source beautifully puts it, the resurrection of Jesus authenticates this revelation that love is stronger than death. It was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the divine seal of approval on this one profound, world-changing truth that in the end, love really is stronger than death.